Okay, so before we get started, I want to make a quick, I just want to take the temperature of the room, I guess, about the final exam. Now, we are currently scheduled for the Friday of exam week from 3:30 to 5:30. I don't know about you, but that sounds awful. And I know, Nick, you also have the Britley 2 exam right before that. So you would be going 1 to 3 with that exam, and then 3:30 to 5:30 with this exam.
It feels like a whole SAT.
Yeah. And that seems like a horrible thing to do to you. So I am my Comp 2 classes don't have exams because it's a comp class, and I think an exam is basically pointless in a composition class. So I'm free the remainder of that week. What would be a time that would work for the two of you to take the exam?
There's only one other class I think will have an exam. I'll check on it and email you.
Okay, yeah.
But other than that, my only other exams are with you.
Okay. Yeah. And it seems mean to make you take them both right in a row.
Yeah. My only final, it's online, is Wednesday from 10:30 to 12:30. So
Okay.
anytime before or after that is great, because the rest of the week I've managed to get what I can from work.
Okay. All right.
We're short-staffed
Uh-huh.
severely.
Okay, so yeah, just let me know what your availability is then, and we'll work something out that works for everybody. Because I didn't even realize that they would do exams at 3:30 to 5:30 on Friday.
I didn't either. I've never seen that on
No,
the exam.
I've never had that before. So yeah, okay, so yeah, we'll deal with that then. So does anybody have any questions about the presentation assignment, or about the exam, or about anything else coming up?
Paper 2.
Okay. Essentially, it will be like paper 1, but with research. And you will write it on The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings. Why did you want to write about something else?
I was just gonna turn my presentation into my paper.
That is a no. We do not allow that. But yeah, I will give you some firmer guidelines on Wednesday. But yeah, essentially, you just pick something that interests you about The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings. You know what? I'll even allow you to include The Fall of Gondolin or The Children of Hurin if you want to write about either of those. You'll need 5 secondary sources. So probably a good idea to start looking for those as early as possible. It'll be 2,000, 3,000 words. But again, remember, you're going to be quoting research extensively, so it's probably about the same amount of your own material as was in the first paper.
Did we do what we did with the first paper?
No.
No. Okay.
Are we still turning in proposals and annotated bibliographies, or is that more for the 2000 class?
That's really more for the 2000 level class, just to get people in the habit of. The reason I do that in the 2000 level class is to make sure that people start doing the research early enough. Because if you try to do a research paper in one night, your paper is going to suck, right? Now I figure in a 3,000, 4,000 level class, by and large, people already understand that. So yeah, I'm happy to look over sources you might have questions about. I'm happy to look over drafts or proposals that you want to give me. But I'm not worried about those formal parts of the paper so much. Yeah, you'll just write the paper. Any other questions?
Oh, for my presentation, since I'm doing the Women of Tolkien,
Uh-huh.
should I just focus on all his works, or should I narrow it down to maybe what we're currently reading?
I would say narrow it to the Lord of the Rings.
Okay, that's what I was
Yeah.
going to do.
Yeah.
But I wanted to.
Yeah, but you certainly don't have to narrow it to like that. What we're talking about like we're looking at that particular day. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You can go with the whole of Lord of the Rings. I would say go with the whole of the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit, but there are no women in the Hobbit.
No. I think I got three main women from Lord of the Rings. I think I can get enough material from that. 15 minutes from that.
But I think that actually kind of does make for a good segue into one of the major themes that we see in the book as a whole, right? And that is that importance of male friendship bonds. Right? Even with the fracturing of the fellowship, right? We've got these groups of male friends who are helping each other, protecting each other, and trying to keep each other out of danger, right? So our groups split now into Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli. All right, we've got Merry and Pippin, carried off by the orcs and supporting each other in that ordeal. And off stage at the moment somewhere, we have Frodo and Sam. Right, so we'll come back to this idea of male friendship in a minute, but one thing I do want to note is the difference in narrative perspective that we get at the beginning of the Two Towers. Whose shoulder have we been looking over through the whole of the Fellowship of the Ring?
Frodo's.
Yeah, Frodo has been the perspective character throughout, right? And now with the fragmenting of the Fellowship, we also get a fragmenting of perspective. And in fact, we will see, even as the spotlight returns to Frodo, gradually, in the chapters that feature him, perspective is going to shift away from him and towards Sam, right? So Frodo is going to continue to recede into the background of his own narrative in various ways. But for today, we're really only concerned with what's happening with these two groups. Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli, who are tracking Merry and Pippin, right? And this kind of leads us to the other interesting feature of this portion of the narrative, right? This is actually one of the things that the fragmenting of perspective allows for. What do we notice about chapter 2 and chapter 3 here? What's going on in the Riders of Rohan chapter?
Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli they've crossed into Rohan.
Uh-huh.
And it's more like, it's told from a tracking perspective. And they come across the riders.
Uh-huh.
And they're informed hey, we normally don't let y'all come through here, but we will. This is what's going on with the orcs. There's a rise in the orcs.
Uh-huh.
But there's also fighting amongst them.
Okay.
And they actually learned about hobbits. They thought they were just stories.
Yeah.
So there's an exchanging of information.
Uh-huh. There is also, and this is one thing I just want to put to the side and then maybe come back to, right? We have a direct mirroring episode here of something that happened in Beowulf, right? Éomer's questioning of Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli is taken in large part from the episode early in Beowulf when Beowulf lands in Denmark and is questioned by the Coast Guard, right? And this is not the only scene in this part of the narrative that mirrors Beowulf. But what else do we, what do we notice about the process of Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli's tracking efforts here? What do they keep finding?
Footprints.
Mm-hmm.
They found his brooch. They found
Yeah.
Pippin's brooch.
Yeah.
They find dead orcs.
They,
Yeah.
yep.
They found the knife that,
Uh-huh.
Pippin
Mm-hmm.
used to cut his robes with.
Yeah.
So they're finding evidence that Merry and Pippin are still alive.
Right.
And as for all intents and purposes, are well.
Uh-huh. But what's happening to Merry and Pippin is actually slightly ahead in time of what's happening to Aragorn and his group, right? So what's happening in the Riders of Rohan chapter is actually happening by and large after the things that happen in the Uruk-hai chapter, right? So a lot of this part of the novel works narratively through a process called analepsis. Now, Nick, you might remember what prolepsis is because we discussed this when we talked about A Christmas Carol in Britlit 2. Do you recall what prolepsis was?
It was showing the future, wasn't it?
Yeah. Prolepsis is a flash forward in a narrative, right? So when Ebenezer Scrooge is taken into the future by the ghost of Christmas yet to come, right? He's shown things that haven't happened yet. In fact, the whole episode of The Ghost is actually prolepsis because it's all, happening before Christmas actually comes, right? Analepsis is the opposite. Analepsis is a flash backward. So what we get here is mysteries set up in the Riders of Rohan chapter that are then solved for the reader, but not for the characters.
Gimli calls them riddles.
Yeah. Yeah, you get the riddles in chapter 2, and you get the solutions in chapter 3. Right? So the readers know what happened to Merry and Pippin, even if the other characters do not, right? So what this analepsis is designed to do is create a sense of what is called dramatic irony. Does anybody know what this means?
Something the reader knows that the characters don't.
Exactly, yes. Yep, the reader has information, the characters do not. So we know that Merry and Pippin have escaped and are safe with Treebeard long before Aragorn figures any of this out, right? In fact, he never really figures it out. Gandalf just tells him to knock it off. Right? It's okay, this is, all is well with them, and you'll see soon enough, right? But I think it's important to think about what impels Aragorn and the others to undertake this journey to find and protect the hobbits in the first place, right? And it is, again, these loyalties, these, what we call homosociality. Right. Their loyalty to other members of their male friend group prevents them from abandoning Merry and Pippin to torture and death, despite the fact that they were supposed to be on the quest of the ring, right? They figure Frodo is at least in less immediate danger than Merry and Pippin. And so that bond of friendship leads them to go after the arguably less important hobbits, right?
Aragorn even makes that statement.
Uh-huh.
He makes it to Legolas and Gimli saying, I would follow Frodo all the way to Mordor if he would have let me.
Uh-huh.
But Merry and Pippin need, more or less Merry and Pippin need
Sure.
And Frodo's not going to let his
Uh-huh.
friends come with him.
And Aragorn goes and gets that broad perspective from sitting on the seat of Aemon Hen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Before coming to that conclusion, right? So I think I just went over the last couple of response papers, and I was reading yours about these seeing devices and this notion of perspective, and it did actually get me thinking about a couple of things, right? One of them being that the first book is largely about broadening Frodo's experience of the world, right? Much as The Hobbit was about broadening Bilbo's experience of the world. And Frodo sees things at various times in ways that do transcend time and space, right? And Aragorn, before he makes this very momentous decision, goes up and does the same thing. Now, Legolas seems to be able to naturally do the same thing, right? We know, for example, that Legolas can see at a much greater distance than the others can, right? So Aragorn can read signs very well that are in his immediate vicinity, but Legolas can see miles and miles into the distance, right?
Was it like 12 leagues, I think is what it says?
Something like that, yeah. And I think that the exact distance doesn't necessarily matter. I think what does matter is that the elven experience of time and of space is different, right? Not only do they experience time more slowly, right, or they don't really experience time at all, except it's something that passes them by, but they also have a much different experience of space because they can see so far into the distance, right? They can see what's coming long before, any of their mortal companions can. And I'm not really quite sure what to do with that yet, but it seems important somehow. So, we do have these various moments, right, where he sees potential threats, or he sees, he's able to, again, track those orcs for 12, they're 12 leagues away, right? And he's able to follow them, follow the body of them, while Aragorn is able to look for little signs. Right, so I think there is a difference here between seeing on the macro and the micro level. That's kind of where my this is taking me at the moment. That Aragorn gives us the close-up view, and Legolas gives us the bird's eye view. And Gimli's just kind of following along, huffing and puffing on stumpy legs. Again, bound to the others by friendship, even if he can't be particularly helpful, right?
Gimli just can't see through his hat. That's fine.
Yeah. Now, I would like to spend a little time with the Uruk-hai here, because I think that there's an interesting kind of analog here to this male friendship setup that we have among the members of the Fellowship. So, what can we tell about orcs and their values from this Uruk-hai chapter? This is the first time we've had any real experience of orcs as things other than objects to be slaughtered, right?
can definitely tell there's a new development amongst the orcs.
Okay,
Especially the Isengard orcs.
okay.
There's like, cultural distinctions.
Yeah, good. What are some of these distinctions that we see?
The Isengard orcs are loyal to Saruman, call him, the White Hand.
Okay,
And then the, other orcs feel like it would be better off to get rid of him.
yeah, we have, there are conflicting loyalties within these groups, right? We have, the Isengarders who are loyal to Saruman. And they seem to be, they're led by Ugluk, right? This is Ugluk's crew. And then we have this other group, apparently of Mordor orcs, right? Whose loyalty is to Sauron and the Nazgul. Who, whether they're led by Grishnak or not is questionable, but he seems to voice their opinions, right? He seems to speak for that group. And then you also have these Misty Mountains orcs, right? No clear leader identified, but all they want is to avenge their folk whom the Fellowship killed, right? So we have at least 3 different groups of orcs here with different goals and motivations, working together for the moment. And how smoothly do they seem to be able to work together?
Not at all. Not at all. They also have their own language, like they slip, there's almost like an intelligence, because they do speak the common tongue, but then they also keep slipping back into their own language.
And-
which is very guttural and angry sounding.
And do they all speak the same language?
No.
The reason they're using the common tongue in the first place, we're told, right, is that because they come from different tribes, they can't understand one another's orc speech, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, in addition to their different loyalties, they speak different languages. So again, this suggests that orc culture is not a monolith, right? That there are as many varieties of orcish and as many perhaps ways to be an orc as there are different tribes of orcs, right? And loyalty seems to be primarily at the tribal level rather than to any kind of overarching ideology or anything like that, right? You're loyal to your guys. And what makes you go out and move or work is the threat of some superior force, right? Or desire for reward, right? Like, why do the Isengarders serve Saruman? Why are they so keen on Saruman? What do they get from Saruman?
Resources?
Yeah, specifically, right, they say, right, Ugluk says, right, we are the fighting Uruk-hai. We slew the great warrior. We took the prisoners. We are the servants of Saruman the Wise, the White Hand, the hand that gives us man flesh to eat. We came out of Isengard and led you here, and we shall lead you back by the way we choose. I am Ugluk, I have spoken, right? So, they serve Saruman because he rewards them, right? Supposedly with man's flesh. Though Grishnak doubts the story, right? Since it's probably orc flesh they eat, right? which suggests that, while there's nothing wrong with orcs eating human flesh, eating other orcs
Problematic.
is problematic, yes.
Like no, they have some type of moral
Yeah.
understanding.
Well, and I think that they do have a notion of right and wrong, right? And that their notion of right seems to be in-group loyalty, right? That seems to be the thing they value most, right? Being loyal to your lads. Sticking with your faction, with your group. Which is at least what Grishnok claims brings him back after he's left, right? He says there are some stout lads here who are too good to lose. Now, I think it's also important to note that the Mordor orcs have different orders and a different motivation, right? If we look just above where Ugluk talks about getting man's flesh to eat, right? There's this conversation between Ugluk and Grishnok, right? Is Saruman the master or the Great Eye, said the evil voice. We should go back at once to Lugburs. If we could cross the great river, we might, said another voice. But there are not enough of us to venture down the bridges. I came across, said the evil voice. A winged Nazgul awaits us northward on the east bank. Maybe, then you'll fly off with our prisoners and get all the pay and praise in Lugburs and leave us to foot it as best we can through the horse country. No, we must stick together. These lands are dangerous, full of foul rebels and brigands. So, we also notice that they don't trust other groups, right? They don't trust the others to stick to it. And I'm looking for where Grishnok kind of rhapsodizes about the Nazgul.
Right. I think
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
where Nazgul, says Grishnok, shivering and licking his lips, as if the word had a foul taste that he savored painfully. Is that what you're talking
Yep, that's the one.
You speak of what is deep beyond the reach of your muddy dreams, Ugluk. He said, Nazgul, all that they make out. One day you'll wish that you had not said that. Ape, he snarled fiercely. You ought to know that they are the apple of the great eye, but the winged Nazgul, not yet, not yet. He won't let them show themselves across the great river yet. Not too soon. They're for the war and other purposes.
Okay, so does Grishnok's speech about the Nazgul and his body language as he gives the speech, do these suggest that he expects necessarily to be rewarded for his service? Yeah, why does he serve Sauron and the Nazgul?
He's afraid.
He's scared.
Yes, because they're scary, yes.
Better to be on the side of the thing that can bother
Exactly.
you than to be against it.
Yeah, so the Mordor orcs are motivated, it seems, primarily by fear of something more powerful than them, right? And we already talked about the Misty Mountains orcs, who are only helping because so many of their folk were killed in Moria, right? And they want revenge. And Ugluk, how does Ugluk enforce his authority with the group?
He wins a fight, doesn't he?
Yeah, he starts chopping off heads, right? So yeah, he enforces his will through force.
That's how it kind of was in a lot of early human tribes.
Yeah.
You know, natural selection.
Well, there's nothing really natural about that, right?
but-
Definitely someone doing the selecting.
Yeah. Well, what do you call it? Something strong, the stronger world to survive or something.
Uh-huh.
But, I mean, fear's a good motivator.
Yeah. But it's clear that this is the thing they most respect, right? The thing that keeps everybody in line, right? These groups would fall apart or stop working together if they were not acted upon by some superior will, right? That forces them to do its bidding. And in this case, that superior will is Ugluk and his capacity for constructive violence, right?
Yeah.
So violence is what enforces intergroup cohesion here, right? What can we tell about orc personalities from this?
They're aggressive.
Okay, they're aggressive. What else do we discern about them from the way they talk and the way they behave in this chapter?
They're almost always like competing with each other to talk over.
Okay.
There's like this, even when they're there's this competition to be whoever can talk the loudest or yell the loudest.
Yeah, they're competitive and they're also boastful, right? Ugluk especially is boastful. So yeah, we do see some certainly individualized personalities emerging here, right? Ugluk is big and loud. Grishnak is quieter and a little bit more subtle and sneaky, right? We see at least those two personalities developed, right? So again, a sense that not all orcs are exactly alike. But let's look at the some of the things that the orcs say to each other and to Merry and Pippin here. If we look near the beginning of the chapter, when Pippin is struggling, right? He struggled a little quite uselessly. One of the orcs sitting near laughed and said something to a companion in their abominable tongue. "Rest while you can, little fool," he said then to Pippin in the common speech, which he made almost as hideous as his own language. "Rest while you can. We'll find a use for your legs before long. You'll wish you had got none before we get home." "If I had my way, you'd wish you were dead now," said the other. "I'd make you squeak, you miserable rat." He stooped over Pippin, bringing his yellow fangs close to his face. He had a black knife with a long, jagged blade in his hand. "Lie quiet, or I'll tickle you with this," he hissed. "Don't draw attention to yourself, or I may forget my orders. Curse the Isengarders. Ugluka Balgrunksha Pushtug Saramangula Bubush Sky." He passed into a long and angry speech in his own tongue that slowly died away into muttering and snarling. Now I want to combine with this something that Ugluk says to Merry and Pippin a little bit later on, right? When Merry wakes up and says, "Hello, Pippin," he said. "So you've come on this little expedition too. When do we get bed and breakfast?" "Now then," said Ugluk, "none of that. Hold your tongues. No talk to one another. Any trouble will be reported at the other end and he'll know how to pay you. You'll get bed and breakfast all right. More than you can stomach." So if we take these two passages together, what does this show us orcs actually have? Even if it's warped and twisted.
Sense of humor.
Yeah, they have a sense of humor, right? They're telling jokes. Now, the jokes are mean and vicious, and their sense of humor seems to be built mostly around cruelty, but they are given one, right? They do have a sense of humor. Which makes them seem a little bit more human.
Intelligent too. They're not just muscle.
Yeah, at least some of them display some intelligence. So, one of the most problematic things for a lot of readers about The Lord of the Rings is the way you've got an entire race of people who seem to be depicted as irredeemably evil, right? And it is a little bit difficult to know exactly what to do with this, right? It does seem like orcs are capable of independent action. And they do actually have, again, like some relatively admirable qualities, like this sense of strong in-group loyalty, even if this strong in-group loyalty causes them to come into conflict with others, right? Mm-hmm. They do at least seem to value sticking by each other, even if they don't always actually do it. So, it's hard to know exactly what, I think what, the most useful way to think of this, for me anyway right now, is as a counterexample to the kind of positive homosocial bond represented by the Fellowship and by these kind of smaller friendships within it, right? That we have these fragmented groups, right? Again, we've got 3 separate groups, but they're all working towards a common purpose and goal. Whereas the orcs, we've got 3 separate groups, but they're only working towards this goal as long as it suits them. Right? And indeed, they all have their own conflicting agendas, which we see when Grishnak attempts to steal the ring from Merry and Pippin, who don't even fucking have it, right?
Yeah.
But they're able to, play into his desires and get him to carry them away to a place where they can escape. Although they also have one of those lucky breaks, right? There's another one of those interventions of providence here. Right? When a couple of riders just happen to see Grishnak raise his scimitar to chop them into bits and then come after him, right? So another case where characters in the novel just get this weird lucky break, right? So, what did you guys think of the whole episode in Fangorn? What did you think of Fangorn Forest and Treebeard?
It's interesting.
Okay.
Well,
What's interesting about it?
so Treebeard, they go to what's it called, an Entmoot, meeting of the Ents. And there's no female Ents. It's all male group.
Yeah, this is another all-male group, right?
Yeah. And Treebeard convinces them that they're like, we need to go. We need to stand up. Now it's not just, the people of Middle Earth. It's Middle Earth itself is moving against
Yeah.
Sauron.
Or at least in this, does Treebeard actually give a shit about Sauron?
No.
Sauron's not a direct threat to him, right? Does Treebeard... What, pardon?
It's what Saruman has done to the forest.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Treebeard's problem is with Saruman.
The corruption brought to the forest.
Exactly. Now, I do want to return to that whole thing about there being no female Ents, right? The Entwives being gone. Because I think that kind of points to the stakes of combat for the Ents, right? What happens if an Ent dies?
They're dead and there's no descendants.
Yeah, there's no replacing that population, right?
It says the Entwives just left.
Uh-huh. Yeah, they've disappeared and they have no idea where they've gone. Let's spend some time with that there. Let's go to the bit where they're talking about the Entwives. If you find it before I do, just go ahead and start reading. I think it's right in the middle of the Treebeard chapter. Okay, Pippin asks Treebeard, why are there so few? When you have lived in this country so long, have a great many died? Oh no, said Treebeard. None have died from inside, as you might say. Some have fallen in the evil chances of the long years, of course, and more have grown treeish. But there were never many of us, and we have not increased. There have been no entings, no children, you would say, not for a terrible long count of years. You see, we lost the Entwives. How very sad, said Pippin. How was it that they all died? They did not die, said Treebeard. I never said died. We lost them, I said. We lost them and we cannot find them. He sighed. I thought most folk knew that. There were songs about the hunt of the Ents for the Entwives sung among elves and men from Mirkwood to Gondor. They cannot be quite forgotten. So, Treebeard insists on this distinction here, right? They did not die. We lost them. Why do you think he does this? Why do you think he makes this particular distinction? I mean, partly because this is probably the truth, right? He literally does not know what happened to the Entwives, right?
If they're lost, they can be found. If they're dead, they're
Mm-hmm.
dead.
Yeah, that's true.
It's a play on language.
Yeah. And if they're lost, this actually sets up another mystery, right? Another riddle. If they're dead, there's no riddle. Now, this is a mystery that the text never gives us an answer to, right? It will never tell us what happened to the Entwives. Whether they died, whether they disappeared, whatever, right? But I think that this is something we can file under that whole business of making a secondary world believable, right? That there are, again, these things that go on off screen that have nothing to do with the main narrative, but which do enrich the world picture, right? And make the world more believable. Right? That there is this other stuff out there. That is not part of the main quest or the main narrative. And the loss of the Entwives also makes the stakes higher in attacking Saruman for the Ents, right? And let's look at what Treebeard has to say about the actions that Saruman has been taking. If I can remember where the hell it is.
Is it where he says Saruman is a wizard? Is that the one, the passage you're looking for?
Keep reading. Okay, right, but Saruman is a neighbor.
Yeah, okay.
Uh-huh.
Who is Saruman? Wait, that's Saruman now. Saruman is a neighbor. Okay,
Uh-huh.
found it.
Yep.
Okay,
My copy is 75. I don't know about you.
75.
Okay, good. And just before that, right, he says that he doesn't, Mordor is a long way away, right? Mordor doesn't affect him. He doesn't care about Mordor. But yeah, can somebody continue reading there now but Saruman now?
But Saruman now. Saruman is a neighbor. I cannot overlook him. I must do something, I suppose. I have often wondered lately what I should do about Saruman. Who is Saruman? Asked Pippin. Do you know anything about his history? Saruman is a wizard, answered Treebeard. More than I cannot say. I do not know the history of wizards. They appeared first after the great ships came over the sea, but if they came with the ships, I never can tell. Saruman was reckoned great among them, I believe. He gave up wandering about and minding the affairs of men and elves some time ago. You would call it a very long time ago, and he settled down at Angernost,
Uh-huh.
or Isengard, as the men of Rohan call it.
Okay, so let's pause there for a second, right? What do we already notice here now is a difference between Saruman and Gandalf?
Saruman gave up on men and elves.
Yeah.
Yeah. Saruman is stationary, right? He's set himself up in this tower and doesn't leave it. Whereas Gandalf is a wanderer who works directly among the various free peoples, right? Okay, go ahead, keep going. He was very quiet to begin with.
Okay, he was very quiet to begin with, but his fame began to grow. He was chosen to be the head of the White Council, they say, but that did not turn out too well. I wonder now if even then Saruman was not turning to evil ways, but at any rate he used to give no trouble to his neighbors. I used to talk to him. There was a time when he was always walking about my woods. He was polite in those days, always asking my leave, at least when he met me, and always eager to listen. I told him many things that he would never have found out by himself, but he never repaid me in like kind. I cannot remember that he ever told me anything, and he got more and more like that. His face, as I remember it, I have not seen it for many a day, became like a window in a stone wall, windows with shutters inside.
So what else can we see about Saruman from this description?
He uses people and then shuts them off.
Yeah, he's secretive and manipulative, right? He'll draw all kinds of information out of you, but won't give anything back. Now, Nick, can you continue with? I think I understand what he is up to. Which is, yeah, this particular passage is important.
I think that I now understand what he is up to. He is plotting to become a power. He was a mind of metal and wheels, and he does not care for growing things, except as far as they serve him for the moment. And now it is clear that he is a black traitor. He has taken up with foul talk with the orcs, Brum. Worse than that, he has been doing something to them, something dangerous. For these Isengarders are more like wicked men. It is a mark of evil things that came in the great darkness, and that they cannot abide the sun, but Saruman's orcs can endure it, even if they hate it. I wonder what he has done. Are they men he has ruined, or has he blended the races of orcs and men? That would be a black evil.
Okay, so a couple of things. So first, the whole notion that the mind of metal and wheels. So what does that associate Saruman with?
Vehicles,
In the industry.
industry.
Yeah.
Or Morgoth and his war machine.
Yeah, this is very much like Melko in the Fall of Gondolin, right? You know, before he was given the name Morgoth later on in Tolkien's process, right? Yeah, where the dragons look a lot more like tanks and planes than they do like reptilian beasts, right?
And Sam's vision in Galadriel's mirror.
Yeah. Yeah, the industrialization of the Shire, right? Which, we can't tell when that's happening, right? Because the mirror is kind of unmoored from time. But, yeah, that should be a hint that Saruman is involved there, right? Now, what else? What awful thing has he been doing?
Experimenting on the orcs.
Yeah, he's doing some kind of genetic engineering, right?
To make it where they can go out in the sun.
Yeah. And Ugluk and his lads, right, are the results of this process. So, the basic idea here, right, is that Saruman is not respectful of nature, right? He has no love for growing things except as they serve him in the moment, right? That includes living beings, right, not just plants. We were told in Gandalf's narrative of his escape, right, that Saruman does not pay enough attention to animals as well as to plants. All right, we get the remainder of the picture of his activity here, right? Treebeard rumbled for a moment as if he were pronouncing some deep subterranean entish malediction. Some time ago I began to wonder how orcs dared to pass through my woods so freely, he went on. Only lately did I guess that Saruman was to blame, and that long ago he had been spying out all the ways and discovering my secrets. He and his foul folk are making havoc now. Down on the borders they are felling trees, good trees. Some of the trees they just cut down and leave to rot. Orc mischief, that. But most are hewn up and carried off to feed the fires of Orthanc. There is always a smoke rising from Isengard these days. Curse him, root and branch. Many of those trees were my friends, creatures I had known from nut and acorn. Many had voices of their own that are lost forever now. And there are wastes of stump and bramble where once there were singing groves. I have been idle. I have let things slip. It must stop. So, part of the issue here is the wanton destruction of woodlands, right? Which Tolkien seems to regard generally as a bad thing.
Yeah. I'm the man that would talk to you for 30 minutes about a tree. Yeah, I would think the destruction of nature is a big no-no. Sure.
I like trees.
Yeah.
I've got nothing against trees. But I think what I'd like to try to do here is compare this vision of the forest that Treebeard describes to the old forest. From the first half of the Fellowship of the Ring. And let's try and remember what the old forest was like.
Hostile.
Yeah.
Especially to hobbits.
Yep. Those trees are a bunch of lousy hobbit haters, yes.
But, I mean, to be fair, they have every right to be hobbit haters. Their anger is justified.
Yeah, I mean, we're told by Treebeard, right, that Fangorn and the Old Forest are both part of the ancient forest that once covered all of Middle-earth, right? So they're both part of that primeval woodland that once covered most of the continent. And that they resent the hobbits as invaders, right? And destroyers. Right. We remember, for example, when Tom Bombadil gave us the what the world looked like from a tree's perspective, right? But I think another thing that we might note here is the presence and importance of singing in both contexts, right? On the one hand, how does Tom Bombadil go about controlling the behavior of trees?
He sings to them.
He sings to them, yeah. Right. Old Man Willow, I know the song for him, right? And Old Man Willow himself sings to lull the hobbits to sleep, right? So, in the Old Forest context, singing seems to be about control on some level, right? What was that?
Yeah, somebody was walking by.
Anywho. Now, when Treebeard talks here about singing groves, right, these trees had voices of their own. Does he seem to have the same kind of thing in mind?
It wasn't a matter of like hostility or control. I think it was just a matter of communication.
Okay.
And like they're just happy to be.
Uh-huh.
And there was once more of them.
Uh-huh.
And I mean, they probably was. The wife, the Entwives and
Sure.
the small Ents were there, and
Uh-huh.
they were a community.
Yeah. Well, and the trees themselves had voices, right? So he seems to attribute a voice to all living, growing things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there seems to be something particularly horrible about the wanton destruction of something with a voice, right? The fact that these trees have voices indicates that they have something to say, right? That they have something they can communicate about their experience of the world.
Knowledge lost.
Yeah, knowledge lost. And on top of that, I mean, like, just it's when you anthropomorphize an object like that, right? It usually is to create some kind of bond of sympathy with the reader, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, there is knowledge lost in the destruction of these groves. Though it's not necessarily knowledge that anyone but an ant could have drawn out of them or really would have cared much about. But, yeah, more importantly, it's a more subtle way in which trees are humanized than the Ents themselves, right? I mean, the Ents are essentially humanoid trees that, you know, go walking around and talk and drink and do all these other things that humanoid creatures do, right? But the trickier thing is making people feel the same way about trees that are stuck in the ground, right? And so I think that giving them a voice is one way of doing that, right?
I think this is interesting because this was what published in 1954.
Uh-huh.
And we've only recently learned that plants actually communicate. Groves of trees actually communicate
Yeah,
with each
yeah.
other. I think that's just it's interesting.
Well, you know, and
That in 1954,
Yeah.
he had this idea
Yeah.
And now here recently, within the last 2 years or so, we've
Sure.
learned that.
And I think that this is like a slight side tangent here, but I may have mentioned my wife and I started subscribing to the BritBox streaming service, and I've been watching a metric shit ton of old Doctor Who. And one thing that I'm watching these episodes of the show that deal with things like environmental degradation and corporate takeover of governments and things like that. Hazards to the environment, global warming, greenhouse gas emissions, and it's I'm thinking okay, so this is the late '60s, early '70s, so either these shows were weirdly prescient, right? And then I'm thinking, well, no, they actually weren't prescient. These were still live issues then. But then the '80s happened. And Reagan and Thatcher, and all of that stuff got kind of shoved under the rug. And yes, I think, Tolkien is both a capital C conservative in many ways, and also a small c conservative in that he is in favor of the conservation of natural resources, right? And I think that, what Saruman is doing to the Old Forest is different in kind from what is doing to Fangorn is different in kind from what Hobbits do to the Old Forest, right? Taking what they need from it. Whereas, Saruman is taking what he is sometimes just destroying, and is otherwise taking from nature to pollute and degrade nature. I think it's also worth noting, too, that even though these get tied together in the Lord of the Rings narrative as part of the same forest, again, that the Old Forest's creative origins are different, right? That Fangorn and that primeval forest is part of that original conception of Middle-earth that dates from the Silmarillion material, and the Old Forest is not. All right, so since we started early, we're running pretty close. We didn't really get a chance to talk much about the reemergence of Gandalf or about Aragorn and Gimli and Legolas's quest here. So we may we'll start with the Gandalf stuff when we come back next time. But let me give you the reading questions for the next segment of this.
Watching that scene in the Peter Jackson movie is okay, that's the math. I get that. You gotta make a big old scene. I get it. It's amazing. And then reading that scene, I'm you're just a drama queen, Gandalf. Get over yourself, man.
Well, I first remember seeing that. My father always used to get whatever that year's Tolkien calendar was. It would just be paintings of different scenes from The Hobbit and The Silmarillion and The Lord of the Rings, and there was always one of Gandalf standing on the rock in white robes with a staff, and the weapons of his three friends bursting into flames as they came towards him, and so on and so forth.